Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Dev Sodiger.
And I'm the other co-host, Hugh David, and with us today and all this week, while we are looking at the various minutes we're looking at, is, of course, Leslie Byron Pitt, podcaster, broadcaster, and film critic. Welcome.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. What about yourself?
Yeah, we're doing okay. Today we are looking at minute 47. We are at the Hippo Club in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and we are eavesdropping on our lead characters, Martin and Debbie, having the return match, the date that brings them back together. Is it a first date? No. Is it a second date? Well, they've been dating before. This is a weird situation to be sitting in on, but we get to be in on it. Prime seats of the house. So
It's a much more intimate version of the conversation that everybody is having, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has come back from their 10-year high school reunion, hasn't seen anybody for 10 years. This is a small town, so that's probably straight up not true. But everybody's having that conversation of, how have you been? What have you been up to? How successful were you? How much money are you now making? Do I give a shit about you? Are you cool now? All of those subtext questions. But this is for the two people where the answers really, really matter for each other, right? Yes. This is not I'm going to see you once, we're going to pretend that we're going to stay in touch and we're going to never see each other again, kind of casual acquaintance. This is make or break. And I think especially that resonates for Martin.
I mean, one of the things I kind of put down in my notes, this is what filmmaking is in capital letters. And
that's such a Les comment, sorry.
The reason why I say that is because when we look at this minute, it's pretty you get. I was saying it to my wife beforehand. I was like, "This is what we kind of used to do in film studies at university or anything else like that, where you would do a shot for shot analysis or anything else like that." And what you see here is actually just it's pretty much a simple two-shot at first, kind of. The alchemy comes in just the positioning of the camera, so it's slightly distanced. Cut to when they start asking the questions that are really starting to penetrate them, it gets closer. And it's such a small, simple action, simple thing to do. But once the camera goes in and it's a little bit closer and they can't escape over the shoulder or anything else like that, you can sense the intimacy, and the performances are the performances and they're top notch and they're great. But it is just certain things like that is stuff that I feel that is so missing from modern filmmaking, where it's like, okay, we want to do intimacy, we want to do something. We want to make sure that these guys are in love. We want to do this, or we want to show distance. We want to do that. And it is such a simple thing to just go, right, we're going to position the camera a little bit closer when they ask certain questions. And the dialogue does a lot of work here. The performances do a lot of work here. But that is just the icing on the cake of just turning around and just going, I've got this camera in this position for a reason, and now I'm doing this for a reason, and then I'm doing this, and at the end of this minute, something comes and disrupts that. And once you're watching these two people go from a certain distance to very close in between each other, and then there's a disruption, it goes back to that distance again, and they've lost it. That spell kind of breaks.
Yep.
And you only know, it's such a nerdy film thing to kind of look out for, but it is how films work. That's what you look for films to do.
Yeah, and it's noticeable even if you're not thinking of it as a film critic, right? The reason that this conversation, which is completely banal in what is otherwise largely an action movie, engages you is because it's about those details, because the camera work builds that tension for you, really gets you invested in it, and then you've got the break, which we'll unfortunately have to wait until tomorrow to talk about. But it's amazing, right? This is where writing is all about the details. Filmmaking is all about the structure and the composition, and the acting plays into this, right? Like we've mentioned before, how real the chemistry between John Cusack and Minnie Driver is in this film, how it really, really sells.
So in a previous episode, I have mentioned the fact, as you say, Dev, about the chemistry here and the intensity, and I mentioned that I hadn't realised, and in hindsight, it's obvious that Cusack has a habit of dating his co-stars in this particular early era. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's just it just plays into my understanding of the intensity. And here it's really, really apparent. There is something so genuine about the way Driver's looking at him. It goes beyond acting, is my feeling. That's my feeling. I feel like, yes, it's acting, but you can see, I mean, it's because of the choices that Armitage makes in the editing to, like, Les, your point about the back and forth of the camera, the push in on the moment where he cuts in on her and she's in a close up, whereas before she wasn't. When he cuts back to Cusack's still at the same distance. He doesn't go Cusack close up for a little bit longer. She gets that moment, and the moment is purely physical. It's not verbal. It's her reacting to something he said, and I keep thinking to myself, this is either the phenomenal acting or this is because she genuinely is kind of having that vibe, the date vibe, and enjoying the moment. And Armitage knew we caught that. We got to capture that and keep that in the sequence. But also some of the things that Cusack's doing, some of his visual tics. We've seen him before. We see him after this film in other films do it. We've seen it before, and it's that kind of thing he's got about making himself look a little bit more. He cuts his height down. Right, he's physically going like this, and he's trying to lower himself and be more charming, and his face is much more open. Sunglasses are off. He's pushed the hair out of the way. He's much more kind of trying to make himself appealing.
He builds a rapport.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing is, we should have mentioned it in the minute before. But there's a beautiful bit in the conversation in that minute before, where there's a phone call. Well, obviously they're having the phone call and having the phone conversation. When Minnie Driver's Debbie picks it up and realizes it's Martin, first thing she does is she pulls her jumper closer.
Yes.
And she guards
it. Yes.
And this is the thing. This is acting that I think we take for granted, and he's firing on all cylinders.
Yes.
Because it's that thing on where she hears his voice, she finds out who he is, and she's like, bang, puts it in there. Then we get to this minute, and then the camera work and everything else like that. And like as you said, there is this moment where he asks her something, and he asks her about her ex-husband, and that's when it cuts to the close-up, and that's when it really starts to permeate and kind of penetrate, and then you can see as it gets to that when it gets to the tighter close-ups, that's when the defenses break down, and it's again, like Dev says, you don't think about it, but that's what it's doing. That's what I love about filmmaking, because to do the way of doing that and the economy of how you do that is phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that in keeping with his jittery, paranoid self from earlier, he does a whole little thing with the drinks when they arrive, positioning them in certain ways, and she notices it, and as she carries on talking to him, she repositions her glass slightly, and it's just like. Like, I know I did not notice that the first time I saw it, probably, but I've noticed it several times since, and it's just, again, it's the game playing between them, it's the way they relate to each other, it's her trying to figure him out. It's not unlike them swapping the seats in the radio station, all this kind of thing. But then on top, and then in addition to that, is her putting her finger on the pulse of the entire film. When she says, well, that was pretty psychotic, wasn't it? And he goes, and he responds physically. He's kind of like, he basically wants to say yes. Because that's the point of the entire film. Yes. And I just love that. I love the fact that that's how quick and smart Debbie is, but also how well she knows him.
Yeah.
Is that she realizes straight away that the guy she knew at school, that was possible. She doesn't think it's possible, which is why she says, surely that's not. And then you can just kind of see the realization sinking in. And that's the essence of the film. you know, the kind of what do you do when you realize you're that guy? Do you go and pick the girl up and go to the ball, you know, and risk, you know, causing a fight and beating the living hell out of somebody at the ball? Or, I mean, that's the other. Oh my god, yeah, that's the other piece of ironic foreshadowing, isn't it? Isn't it? Because if he'd gone to the ball originally, what we see in this film eventually is probably what would have happened. Just whoever was annoying him back then, that's what would have probably gone down. And actually, by avoiding it, you know, history has eventually repeated itself, whether you like it or not, just for different reasons. That's really sweet. Sorry, I've just, now that that's hit me, that is a really, really sweet piece of cyclical writing.
He's just living out the prophecy of an oracle at Delphi, right?
Precisely, right?
Yeah.
That's so
It doesn't matter what you do, it's still going to happen.
And that's beautiful, man. I can't believe. Well, you know, the only reason I spotted it this time is I've been spent the entire week finishing up teaching to Romeo and Juliet, so it's like my brain is in Shakespeare land, and I'm just like. But yeah, it's a great little scene, and also it's very noir. I like the way the club looks. The club looks very much like a different era, a very 40s era. And in fact, it could come out of the grifters, you know.
Yeah,
and
very much out of the grifters.
I want to talk a little bit about the musical choices in this, but I think maybe let's leave that for the next minute.
Sounds good. Let's do that.
We need to bring that up. It's a great track,
isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna have some good time to talk about that in the next minute.
Let's do that. Fantastic. Okay, folks, this was minute 47 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your co-hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Soligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was Leslie Byron Pitt, podcaster and film critic. Where can we find out more about you, Leslie?
Yeah, sure. So you can find more about me. I mean, at the moment, the podcast I'm on is can't remember it for the life of me now. Fatal Attraction. Sorry, it's an erotic film podcast, thriller podcast, where we kind of break down all the thrillers from the 80s and 90s and what we love about them, what we hate about them.
Awesome. You can also find us on all good podcast players, presumably like the one that you're listening to this on right now, as well as on YouTube, where you can actually see us. We have an account on X, formerly known as Twitter, as well as Spotify. And for all of those, it is at Debi Radio. That is DEBI Radio. And we are also have our own website, which is debiradio.com. Again, DEBI.
And finally, if you want to talk to us, come and find us at the Facebook Listeners Group, which is, once again, Debi Radio, DEBI Radio, 79.5 FM Fan Club. That's DEBI Radio.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time.